So what if I told you that stress literally leaks through your skin?
Yeah, that sounds crazy.
Right. Or that casually touching store receipts on your daily coffee run might be directly linked to visceral belly fat.
Which is something nobody wants to hear.
Exactly. Or on a much more positive note, that eating 5 very specific foods right before you go to bed can actually actively repair your brain tissue overnight.
I mean, I know it sounds like a mix of science fiction and just, modern anxiety, but we are actually looking at the hard biological reality of how human bodies operate today.
Welcome to our deep dive. I'm so excited for this one.
Me too.
Today, we are going on a massive, comprehensive exploration into the modern neuroscience of human optimization, well-being, and just the incredibly complex mind-body connection.
Yeah, we're really moving past the abstract woo-woo ideas of wellness and looking at the actual physiological mechanics of the nervous system.
Right, because we have a fascinating stack of sources in front of us. But our primary roadmap for this journey is a sweeping, honestly, deeply insightful conversation with leading neuroscientist Dr. Tara Swart.
She's the author of a book called The Source, which is fantastic.
It really is. And we are also layering in cutting-edge clinical data and health claims from, well, a whole variety of other medical experts to paint the full picture. Because the goal for you listening is to move way past those tired self-help tropes.
Yeah, we aren't talking about just, thinking happy thoughts or adopting a positive mindset. I mean, we are diving into the systemic, measurable ways that our brains influence our physical bodies, our cellular aging.
And our relationships, right.
Exactly. Our relationships and quite literally our everyday reality. Because the science is finally mapping the biological pathways of concepts that, honestly, a decade ago sounded purely philosophical.
Totally. Because when we talk about the brain, I think there is a tendency to think of it as an isolated supercomputer, right? Like just sitting in a dark room inside our skulls, completely detached from the rest of the body, just issuing commands.
Right. The whole brain in a vat idea.
Exactly. But the more we look at these sources, the more it becomes clear how wildly interconnected our physical and mental states actually are. So let's unpack this very first, frankly, stop you in your tracks claim from Dr. Swart.
The leaking stress.
Yes. She argues that stress leaks through the skin, that it is physically contagious, and that it actually alters how we store belly fat. And I really want to start with the leaking part because that completely upends how we normally talk about emotions.
It really does. It fundamentally changes the paradigm. Because we tend to think of stress as, an invisible mood, like something we contain entirely internally.
Right, like I'm stressed, but you can't see it unless I'm yelling.
Right. But from a neurochemical perspective, stress is a highly measurable physical emission. When your brain perceives a threat, and that could be a literal physical danger, in the evolutionary sense, or just an aggressive email from your boss, it activates the HPA axis.
Okay, wait, what does HPA stand for again?
Right. It stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So your brain sends a signal down to your adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys.
Okay.
And those glands, they just flood your system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your body goes into a state of extreme high alert. But, and this is the crazy part, that state is not perfectly sealed inside your physical form. You literally sweat out chemical markers of that stress.
Okay, but we are talking about sweat, right? So is this like the kind of sweat you get from running on a treadmill?
No, actually, this is entirely different. Humans have two main types of sweat glands. Eccrine glands cover most of your body, and they produce that watery sweat that cools you down when you're working out.
Okay, the cooling sweat.
Right. But apocrine glands, which are concentrated in areas like the underarms, they produce a much thicker fluid. And when you experience acute psychological stress, these apocrine glands release a specific type of sweat that contains chemical signals.
Wait, like pheromones?
Essentially, yes, human pheromones.
Yeah.
These chemical markers literally broadcast your internal state of panic or anxiety to the outside world.
Wow. Okay, so if stress is literally leaking out of us through our pores, that makes Dr. Swart's next point. That stress is contagious, well, much less metaphorical.
Oh, it's very literal.
Because if I'm having a terrible high anxiety day and I sit down next to someone on the train or I walk into my living room, am I actively infecting the people around me with my stress? Like secondhand smoke?
The short answer is yes. Yes, you are.
That is wild.
Understanding the mechanism, you kind of have to imagine our evolutionary ancestors foraging in a group on the savannah.
Okay, picture the savannah.
Right. If one person suddenly senses a predator in the brush, They don't have the time or the evolutionary luxury, really, to calmly explain the situation to the rest of the tribe.
Like, excuse me, guys, there's a lion over there.
Exactly. You'd be eaten. So instead, their body instantly spikes in cortisol. They emit those specific stress pheromones from their apocrine glands. Their breathing rate changes. Their microexpressions shift.
And the others notice.
Subconsciously, yes. The other members of the group have evolved to instantly pick up on those exact chemical and visual signals. Their olfactory systems detect the pheromones, and their amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it just lights up in response.
Wait, so the second person's brain registers the smell of stress and immediately starts producing its own cortisol without even knowing what the threat is.
Yes, exactly. The threat is communicated purely chemically. Without a single word being spoken, the entire group's nervous systems sync up, and they're all collectively primed for fight or flight. It's actually a brilliant survival mechanism.
I mean, sure, it is brilliant if we are dodging a lion. But today the predator is what? Gridlock traffic? Or inflation? Or a looming deadline?
Right, the stressors are modern, but the biology is ancient.
Because I have had days where I walk through the front door after a brutal commute, completely silent, and within 2 minutes I can literally see my kids and my spouse tense up. And I used to think they were just reading my bad mood. But you're saying I am walking into the house and essentially crop dusting my family with stress chemicals.
That's a funny way to put it, but biologically, yeah.
Yeah.
You are inadvertently signaling to the nervous systems of the people in your environment that the environment is fundamentally unsafe. Their biology has no choice but to respond.
Oh man, that makes me feel kind of guilty.
Well, Dr. Swart actually highlights that this has profound systemic impacts, particularly concerning how stress affects women and its impacts on pregnancy, too.
Oh wow, how so?
Because of different baseline hormonal profiles, like the interplay of estrogen and progesterone, the physical toll of chronic cortisol exposure can manifest quite severely in women. And during pregnancy, this takes on a whole generational dimension.
Wait, does the stress transfer to the baby?
Yes. High levels of maternal cortisol can actually cross the placental barrier.
So the fetus is literally swimming in the mother's stress response.
It's even more structural than just swimming in it. The developing fetal brain is actively using its environment to figure out what kind of world it is about to be born into.
Wow, checking the weather out there.
Basically, if the mother is chronically stressed, the fetal nervous system alters its own development. The fetus's HPA axis, its own stress response system, may develop to be hyperreactive.
So it's born stressed.
You're essentially pre-programming the child to be highly vigilant and prone to anxiety before they've even taken their first breath. It really highlights how the boundary between my stress and your biology is just incredibly porous.
It makes you realize that regulating your own nervous system is almost like a public health responsibility for the people you live and work with.
It really is.
But, okay, this external leaking is only half of the equation, right?
Yeah.
There is a deeply internal physical consequence that both Dr. Swart and another anti-aging expert in our sources brought up, which is the belly fat connection.
Right, visceral fat.
Dr. Swart notes that chronic stress physically gives you belly fat. But then an anti-aging expert in the clinical data takes it a step further with this completely bizarre claim that we should stop touching receipts immediately as a fast way to shrink visceral fat.
I know, it sounds like a conspiracy theory.
It really does. I mean, I need to understand the biological link between a paper receipt and my waistline.
Okay, so we have to break down the specific nature of visceral fat first, because not all fat is created equal.
Right.
Subcutaneous fat is the soft fat just under your skin, the kind you can pinch. Visceral fat is the hard, deep belly fat that wraps tightly around your internal organs.
Yeah.
Your liver, your pancreas, your intestines.
The dangerous stuff.
Extremely dangerous. Because visceral fat is highly metabolically active. It acts almost like an independent endocrine organ, constantly releasing inflammatory cytokines into your bloodstream.
Yikes. So how does stress trigger that?
When your body is under chronic psychological stress, bathed in that cortisol we just discussed, your brain assumes you're facing a prolonged famine or a persistent physical threat. So the biological response is to hoard easily accessible, dense energy right near the vital organs to ensure survival.
Okay, so chronic stress literally relocates where your body stores its fat reserves.
Exactly.
Okay, that covers the psychological stress. But how do we get from feeling stressed at work to the physical receipt from the grocery store causing fat around my liver? Am I just stressed about the price of the groceries?
No, though that doesn't help. The mechanism here is completely invisible and much more insidious. You know the gloss you see on thermal paper receipts? The kind you get at the grocery store, the ATM, the coffee shop?
Yeah, that shiny, thin paper.
That's not just ink. Those receipts are coated in endocrine-disrupting chemicals, primarily BPA, which is bisphenol A, or its chemical cousin, BPS.
Wait, BPA, like the stuff they took out of baby bottles?
The exact same stuff. These chemicals are used as color developers in the thermal printing process, and they are unbound, meaning they just sit loosely on the surface of the paper.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. So when you touch them, especially if your hands are slightly damp, or, and this is a big one, if you have just used an alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Which everyone does now.
Right. Hand sanitizer actually increases dermal permeability, so these chemicals absorb straight through your skin.
So they bypass the digestive system entirely?
Yes. They bypass the liver's first-pass metabolism, which is the body's primary filtration system for toxins you swallow. Instead, the BPA absorbs through the dermal layers directly into your bloodstream.
And what does it do once it's in the blood?
Once in the bloodstream, these endocrine disruptors act as hormonal imposters. Structurally, BPA molecules are shaped similarly enough to estrogen that they can bind to estrogen receptors on your cells.
So it's essentially picking the lock on the cell using a fake key.
That is a perfect analogy. It picks the lock,
Okay.
and it completely disrupts your natural metabolic signaling. Your brain registers this massive influx of chaotic, fake hormonal signals and interprets this chemical disruption as a severe systemic stressor, a toxic environment.
Which spikes the cortisol again.
Exactly. It triggers the exact same evolutionary defense mechanism we just talked about.
Ah.
It spikes cortisol and signals the body to aggressively hoard visceral fat to protect the internal organs from the perceived toxic onslaught.
Wow.
So the microtoxins on a standard receipt are literally tricking your brain into a state of chemical stress, compounding the psychological stress you might already be feeling.
So, okay, let me get this straight. The scenario is this. I am at the store. I'm already stressed about my day, leaking cortisol onto the cashier through my apocrine glands.
Poor cashier.
Right. And they hand me a thermal receipt coated in unbound BPA. I grab it with hands that I just hit with hand sanitizer. The BPA slips right past my skin's defenses, enters my bloodstream, binds to my estrogen receptors, and sends a fake panic signal to my brain.
Yep.
That chemical panic stacks on top of my actual psychological panic, and my body's response is to immediately start packing inflammatory fat around my liver.
It is the ultimate collision of modern environmental chemistry and ancient evolutionary biology.
Huh.
Your body is doing exactly what it was designed to do to survive a threat, but the threat is literally just a piece of paper.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. And honestly, a little terrifying. If we are accumulating this massive chemical and psychological debt all day long, from literal toxins absorbing through our skin to the stress pheromones we are inhaling on the subway, how is the brain not just completely overwhelmed and broken down by Tuesday?
You'd think it would be.
There has to be a robust clearance mechanism, right? We have to look at how the brain defends and fuels itself to fight back against this daily onslaught.
There is a highly sophisticated clearance mechanism, thankfully, but the catch is that it only fully activates when we lose consciousness. Sleep. Which brings us to Dr. Swartz's insights on improving overall brain health, preventing neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, and the broader clinical data regarding sleep and diet.
You know, we have this ingrained habit in modern culture of treating sleep like a power-off button. We act like we are just shutting down the biological laptop so the battery doesn't drain.
Right. I'll sleep when I'm dead mentality.
Exactly. But based on the clinical research from Dr. William Lai and our sources, it sounds much more like bringing a heavy-duty truck into the mechanic's garage every single night for a full engine rebuild.
The mechanic analogy is spot on. Biologically, to understand why sleep is an active process, you first have to understand what happens when you are awake.
Okay, what happens?
During the day, your brain is functioning on the production shift. It is an incredibly energy-intensive organ. It consumes about 20% of your body's total energy, despite only making up like 2% of your body weight.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah. It is processing billions of synaptic firings every single second. And just like any engine burning fuel, this massive metabolic activity produces toxic waste.
Literal waste in the brain.
Literal physical waste. Specifically, the brain accumulates misfolded proteins, like amyloid beta and tau proteins, and metabolic byproducts in the interstitial space between the brain cells.
So basically, cellular exhaust just builds up in the tissue all day long.
Yes. If you just powered down like a laptop, that toxic exhaust would just sit there, slowly destroying the neural networks over time.
Okay, so what does the night shift do?
During deep, slow-wave sleep, the brain initiates the maintenance shift, through what we now call the glymphatic system. The glial cells in your brain, which are like the support cells, literally shrink by about 60%.
Wait, your brain cells physically shrink?
The glial cells do, yes.
Yeah.
And this physical shrinking opens up the spaces between the neurons, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to rush in under pressure. It mechanically washes all that metabolic debris, all those amyloid plaques, out of the brain tissue and down into the liver to be processed.
That is incredible. But obviously, the mechanic can't actually rebuild the engine or do the maintenance if you don't leave the right replacement parts in the garage.
Right.
And this is where Dr. Lee's research comes in, because he points out that there are specific foods you can eat before bed that actively dictate how well the brain repairs itself overnight. It's not just about fasting, it's about targeted biological inputs.
Exactly. The brain needs highly specific raw materials to synthesize the neurotransmitters required for memory consolidation and to structurally repair the lipid bilayers of the brain cells themselves.
So what are these foods?
Well, Dr. Lee focuses on an eat-to-beat disease framework. He emphasizes foods rich in specific bioactives. So while we talk about a list of foods, the biology really relies on what those foods contain.
Give me an example.
For instance, the brain needs massive amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA, because the structural membranes of the neurons are actually made of these fats.
Okay, so healthy fats. What else?
It needs polyphenols and flavonoids, found in things like dark berries or raw cacao. These actually cross the blood-brain barrier and act as direct antioxidants, neutralizing the oxidative stress caused by that daily toxic exhaust we talked about.
Ah, so berries and cacao. I like that.
Yeah, it's not bad. It also requires amino acids like tryptophan, which you can find in certain nuts and seeds. The body converts tryptophan first into serotonin and then into melatonin, which is the hormone that actually orchestrates the deep sleep architecture in the first place.
Okay, so if I ignore all of that and instead I eat like a massive, highly processed meal full of refined sugars and industrial seed oils at 9 p.m., I am guessing the overnight repair crew gets completely derailed.
You basically force the body to prioritize immediate triage over long-term maintenance. A heavy processed meal causes a massive spike in blood glucose and a subsequent flood of insulin.
So the body is panicking about the sugar.
Right. Your body diverts significant blood flow and metabolic energy to the digestive tract just to process that heavy load. Furthermore, the seed oils and sugars trigger systemic inflammation.
Ah.
So the mechanic isn't washing away the amyloid plaques in your brain. The mechanic is down in the gut trying to put out an inflammatory fire.
Wow.
And then you wake up with the neurological exhaust still sitting in your brain. Over decades, the accumulation of that uncleared amyloid beta is one of the primary biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease.
That paints a very vivid picture. So the night shift is absolutely crucial. But the sources also bring up a critical dependency on the day shift.
Yes.
There is an expert from MedCram in our clinical data who brought up a massive warning about vitamin D, calling out what they refer to as the big lie about sunlight, and linking the lack of sun exposure to the absolute fastest path to dementia. What is the big lie?
So the big lie that clinical sources point to is the modern generalized narrative that all sun exposure is inherently dangerous, causes melanoma, and must be aggressively avoided with sunscreen and staying indoors all the time.
Which is pretty much what we're all taught.
Exactly. And while protecting the skin from burning is obviously biologically necessary, chronic, extreme sun avoidance has resulted in a population-wide catastrophic deficiency in vitamin D.
And why is that so bad for the brain?
Well, to call it a vitamin is actually a historical misnomer. Vitamin D actually functions as a master neurosteroid hormone in the body.
Because we don't naturally get enough of it from our diet, right? We are biologically designed to manufacture it ourselves using the environment.
Precisely. And the mechanism is just a direct interaction with the cosmos, which is cool. When UVB radiation from the sun hits your bare skin, it reacts with a specific type of cholesterol residing in your skin cells.
Okay.
This UV energy physically breaks a molecular ring in the cholesterol, converting it into pre-vitamin D3. This molecule then travels through your bloodstream to your liver, where it is converted into calcifidiol.
Still going.
Yep. And then to your kidneys, where it is finally converted into its active hormonal form, calcitriol.
That is an incredibly complex supply chain just to get a usable hormone. Why is the brain so dependent on it?
Because there are vitamin D receptors located throughout the central nervous system, particularly in the hippocampus, which is the seat of memory.
Right.
This master hormone regulates the immune cells inside the brain, which are called microglia. It essentially instructs the microglia to clear out the amyloid plaques we talked about during sleep, It dramatically reduces neuroinflammation.
Oh, I see the connection now.
Yeah. So when you combine a severe lack of daytime sunlight exposure, resulting in low active vitamin D with poor sleep, you are simultaneously disabling both the brain's signaling system for repair and its physical mechanism for repair.
You fire the project manager and you lock the doors for the janitor.
That's exactly it. The toxic waste builds up completely unchecked, which the experts identify as the fast track to cognitive decline.
So we have to get outside, get UVB rays on our skin to synthesize the master hormone, and we have to fuel our bodies with the right raw materials so the overnight repair crew can actually function. But, everything we are talking about right now is just defensive. It is just preventing the engine from seizing up. The real magic in Dr. Swart's work, the concept that completely changes the trajectory of human potential, happens when we look at the brain's ability to fundamentally rewrite its own code.
We are talking about neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And within the realm of neuroscience, this is arguably the most profound discovery of the last century.
Really? The biggest?
Absolutely. Because for a very long time, dating back to the early pioneers of neurology like Santiago Ramon y Cajal, the absolute scientific dogma was that the adult human brain was structurally static.
Like unchangeable.
Right. The belief was that you developed your neural pathways in early childhood, and by the time you reached your mid-20s, the biological concrete had dried. Your brain was a finished machine, and the rest of your life was simply a slow, unavoidable process of losing neurons until you died.
Which is an incredibly bleak, deterministic way to view human existence. I mean, you are basically trapped in whatever brain you happen to build by age 25.
It is entirely deterministic. And thankfully, modern functional MRI technology proved it completely wrong.
Thank goodness.
Neuroplasticity is the brain's lifelong, continuous ability to reorganize itself, both physically and functionally, in response to your environment, your behaviors, your thoughts, and your traumas.
That's always changing.
Always. The brain is not a static organ. It is a highly malleable, dynamic plastic. Every single time you learn something new, you're physically creating new synaptic connections between neurons.
And when you practice something,
When you practice a skill or repeat a behavior, specific cells called oligodendrocytes wrap a fatty insulating sheath, which is called myelin, around those specific neural pathways. The more myelin, the faster and more effortlessly the electrical signal travels.
wait, okay, if neuroplasticity is the brain's ultimate superpower to reshape itself at will, why does breaking a bad habit feel so incredibly agonizing?
Ah, that's the catch.
Because there is a bold claim in the sources that you can change who you are in 30 days. But I have to stop you there because anyone who has tried to quit smoking or stop looking at their phone first thing in the morning or stop negative self-talk knows that 30 days feels impossible.
It does feel impossible.
If my brain is so plastic, why does trying to stop a habit feel less like a superpower and more like trying to reroute a roaring river with a teaspoon?
The river metaphor is the exact right way to visualize the biology, actually. Because neurologically speaking, breaking a habit is rerouting a river.
Okay, explain that.
Let's look at the mechanics of how a habit forms. Imagine a drop of water falling at the top of a mountain. The first time it falls, it trickles down the path of least resistance over the dirt.
Sure.
But if water falls down that exact same path millions of times over a period of years, it carves a deep, permanent canyon into the stone. Your daily habits are neurological canyons.
Oh, I see.
Every time you engage in a behavior, you heavily myelinate that pathway. You deepen the canyon. The electrical signal flows effortlessly, instantly, and completely subconsciously down that route. And the brain loves this because its primary evolutionary directive is to conserve metabolic energy.
And canyons require zero conscious energy to navigate.
Exactly.
So when I decide I want to stop, like doom scrolling before bed,
When you decide to stop, you're essentially standing at the top of that deep neurological canyon with your teaspoon, trying to force the water to flow horizontally over dry, hard, uncarved ground instead.
and the brain fights back.
It actively fights you. It takes massive, conscious, agonizing metabolic effort to fire an unmyelinated pathway. It sends signals of discomfort and agitation because you are wasting energy doing something new when a perfectly good zero-energy canyon is sitting right there.
Then how do we reconcile that agonizing friction with the claim that you can change who you are in 30 days?
Well, the 30-day timeline isn't magic, but it represents roughly the minimum biological threshold of sustained, daily, conscious effort required to start carving a noticeable new groove in the dirt.
Okay.
But the second, equally important half of neuroplasticity is a process called synaptic pruning.
Pruning, like a tree.
Yes, if you force the water down the new path every single day, and you absolutely refuse to send electrical signals down the old canyon, meaning you completely abstain from the bad habit, the brain realizes the old canyon is no longer being used.
Oh, so it fills it in.
To save energy, it literally dismantles those old synaptic connections. The canyon starts to fill in. So you can profoundly change your baseline in 30 days, but it requires relentless, daily, conscious overriding of your own nervous system until the new path becomes the path of least resistance.
Dr. Swart also discusses this plasticity in the context of coping with trauma, which makes perfect sense when you understand the physical architecture of the brain. Because a trauma isn't just a bad memory, it carves an incredibly deep, jagged canyon in the brain, usually deeply tied to the amygdala's fear response and survival mechanisms.
Yes, trauma creates very efficient fear canyons.
So rewiring trauma isn't just about changing a daily routine. It is about fundamentally dismantling the brain's hyperactive threat detection system. It really frames neuroplasticity as the biological mechanism of hope.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
You are not eternally bound to the physical structure of your past traumas. You
Yeah.
can prune them.
You can actively dismantle the architecture of your past. And, this concept of radical physical flexibility isn't just limited to the neural networks in our skull.
Where else does it happen?
If we zoom into the cellular level, we have to look at the jaw-dropping research from geneticist Dr. David Sinclair included in our sources. He investigates whether biological aging itself can be treated as a plastic reversible condition.
Oh, the anti-aging stuff.
Yes, it's because clinical tests showed that after just 8 weeks of specific protocols, certain human cells appeared 75% younger.
I read that and immediately thought it was a typo. I mean, 75% younger in 2 months. How do you even measure the age of a cell to make that claim?
To understand the measurement, we have to understand the mechanism of epigenetics.
Okay, get me.
If your DNA, your genetic code, is the piano keyboard, your epigenome is the sheet music sitting on the piano.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The keys never change, but the sheet music dictates which keys are played, which genes are turned on, and which are silenced. This is controlled by methyl groups, tiny chemical tags made of carbon and hydrogen that attach to the DNA and physically block it from being read.
So what happens as we age?
As we age, undergo chronic stress, or eat poorly, this epigenetic sheet music gets smudged. The methyl tags get placed on the wrong genes, the cells lose their identity and start acting old and dysfunctional.
So how did Sinclair measure it?
Sinclair uses what's called a DNA methylation clock, or a Horvath clock, to read those tags and determine the exact biological age of the tissue, regardless of the chronological age of the person.
So the cell isn't actually broken. It has just forgotten how to read its own original instructions because of the chemical smudges.
Precisely. What Sinclair's research, which actually builds on the Nobel Prize-winning discovery of Yamanaka factors, suggests is that through specific targeted inputs, you can scrub those smudges off.
What kind of inputs?
Things like biological stressors,
Yeah.
intermittent fasting, cold exposure, or specific molecules that activate longevity pathways. You essentially scrub the smudges off the sheet music. You force the epigenome to reset.
And the cell just remembers.
The cell removes the misplaced methyl tags, remembers its youthful state, and returns to operating like a young cell.
This creates such an incredible parallel. Mental flexibility through neuroplasticity perfectly mirrors cellular flexibility through epigenetics.
It's all connected.
The body and the mind are both highly responsive to new inputs. We can use our conscious will to rewire the brain's canyons, and we can use biological protocols to literally tell our cells to turn back the biological clock. We are not passengers. We are the architects of our biology.
We are.
Yeah.
But, an architect needs tools and an environment to build. This ability to physically rewire ourselves doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
The tools we use to carve those new neurological pathways heavily rely on the internal narrative we run and the external connections we forge.
Which bridges us directly into the next major theme of Dr. Swart's work, the social and communicative brain. She makes a massive point about how the words you say out loud physically affect your brain and your behavior.
Yes, the neuro-linguistic loop.
I want to ground this in everyday life. If I'm constantly complaining about my commute or whining about my job or gossiping about a coworker, am I just venting steam? Or am I physically hardwiring my brain to only see threats and negativity?
You are absolutely hardwiring your brain. There's no such thing as just venting from a neurological perspective.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The language you speak is not just an output device reflecting your inner emotional state. It is an active input device that programs your future neurological reality.
How does that work?
When you speak, your voice travels to your own ear, and your auditory cortex processes the sound of your own words. Your brain assigns a massive amount of weight to the data generated by your own vocal cords.
More than if someone else says it.
Yes. If you constantly use negative, catastrophic, or helpless language saying things like, I am always terrible at this, or everything is falling apart, or the situation is a disaster, you are continuously forcefully activating the stress pathways and the amygdala.
So complaining about my boss is basically doing bicep curls for my anxiety circuits.
That is exactly what is happening. You are inducing hypertrophy in your anxiety pathways. Your brain listens to your words and concludes, they keep talking about disasters and failures, so I need to optimize my systems to be on hyper alert for disasters.
Wow.
It specifically tunes a network in your brainstem called the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
The RAS, what does that do?
The RAS is the biological filter that decides which of the millions of sensory inputs around you actually make it to your conscious awareness. When you complain constantly, you program the RAS to specifically look for evidence in the environment that confirms your negative statements.
So it filters out the good stuff?
You literally become neurologically blind to positive opportunities, solutions, or helpful people because your brain assumes they aren't relevant to the disaster program you keep speaking out loud.
And obviously, this internal linguistic programming bleeds outward into how we interact with others. The sources highlight Dr. Swart discussing the key things for a better relationship and the specific qualities we subconsciously look for in a partner.
This part is fascinating.
It is. There is a fascinating insight from Lewis Howes's interview with her about how we actively attract and pursue people based on our deepest psychological wounds.
It sounds counterintuitive that we would seek out pain, but it makes perfect sense when you look at the neural networks of childhood development. We are biologically drawn to what feels familiar to our nervous system, even if that familiarity is incredibly toxic. During childhood, your brain wires its understanding of love and connection based on the environment provided by your caregivers.
So if it was chaotic,
If you grew up in an environment characterized by high conflict, emotional unavailability, or unpredictable affection, your brain heavily myelinates those specific pathways. It establishes chaos as the baseline for connection.
so as an adult, I'm walking around with a lock that is specifically shaped by my childhood trauma, and I am literally hunting for a partner who has the exact right key of dysfunction to fit that lock.
Yes, exactly. You will subconsciously seek out partners who trigger those exact same familiar neural pathways because the brain vastly prefers a predictable, familiar pain over an unpredictable, unfamiliar unknown.
That is so dark. So a healthy partner feels wrong.
A healthy, stable partner feels boring or even alarming to a traumatized nervous system because the neural pathways for peace simply haven't been built yet.
Wow.
Until you use conscious neuroplasticity to do the agonizing work of changing the lock, physically rewiring your baseline of what safety feels like, you will endlessly repeat the pattern. Healing the wound is the biological prerequisite for selecting a partner with healthy qualities.
But you know, everything we're saying about social cues, relationship programming, and the neurolinguistic loop assumes a standard neurological baseline.
Which isn't always the case.
Right. Because we know from the recent massive wave of adult diagnoses that millions of people are running a completely different operating system. The sources touch upon diagnosing ADHD and autism neurodivergence. How does the social communicative brain function when the fundamental wiring is different?
This is one of the most crucial evolutions in modern neuroscience. For decades, the psychiatric field viewed neurodivergence like autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder purely through a deficit model.
Meaning they thought the brain was broken.
Exactly. The clinical assumption was that the brain was broken, disordered, or failing to communicate properly. But what modern functional imaging is revealing is a neuroaffirming model.
So they aren't broken.
No, these are simply fundamentally different neurological operating systems. The wiring architecture is distinct. For instance, in an ADHD brain, the dopamine reward pathways in the prefrontal cortex function differently.
And dopamine is the reward chemical.
Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and reward anticipation. An ADHD brain struggles to regulate baseline dopamine, which alters executive function. It is not a lack of ability to focus. It is a profound biological inability to regulate focus on tasks that do not provide immediate, high-stimulation dopamine feedback.
Which completely explains the paradox where someone with ADHD might find it physically agonizing to fill out an expense report for 5 minutes.
Because there's no dopamine in an expense report.
Right. But then they can hyper-focus on coding a complex piece of software or writing music for 14 hours straight, forgetting to eat or sleep. The software provides the dopamine the expense report lacks.
Exactly. The brain is hunting for the neurotransmitter it lacks. And in autism, we see profound structural differences in how the brain processes sensory information and social dynamics.
Like what?
Studies suggest that an autistic brain may have intense hyperconnectivity in localized cortical regions, leading to incredible specialized skills, deep focus, and rapid pattern recognition in specific areas.
But then struggles with other things.
However, there may be different connectivity across the long-range pathways that integrate complex, nuanced, unwritten social cues or filter out overwhelming sensory stimuli like bright lights or background noise.
Which explains sensory overload.
Yes. Recognizing these diagnoses, especially for adults who have spent their lives masking, is profoundly healing. It allows people to stop punishing themselves for failing to run standard code and start structuring their environment to optimize for their specific, unique, and often highly advantageous operating system.
It completely shifts the internal narrative from what is broken inside me to, oh, this is the specific machine I am driving.
Exactly.
But beyond the conscious words we use, our relationships, and the specific architecture of our operating systems, our brains are simultaneously processing millions of subconscious data points every single second.
Yes, the subconscious is massive.
Which leads us into the final and perhaps most fascinating section of our deep dive, the realm of peak function. We are moving into the absolute highest cognitive abilities of the human animal.
We're moving past survival, past basic maintenance, and looking at how the brain processes reality at its absolute limit.
I want to start with a concept that usually sounds incredibly mystical, but Dr. Swart grounds it entirely in biology, intuition.
Oh, this is a great topic.
She talks about how intuition actually works and boldly claims why you should always follow it. Now, I have to push back on the absolutism of that advice.
Okay, why?
She says we should always follow our gut. But how do you, as a listener trying to navigate your life, tell the physical difference between true, deep neurological intuition and just standard issue anxiety wearing a disguise?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. How do I know if my gut feeling about declining a job offer is deep wisdom, or if it's just my amygdala panicking about the uncertainty of change?
The distinction is vital because acting on anxiety masquerading as intuition is disastrous. Intuition is frequently dressed up by wellness culture as something psychic or mystical. But neurologically, true intuition is an incredibly rapid, highly sophisticated form of subconscious pattern recognition occurring primarily in the basal ganglia.
Okay, subconscious pattern recognition.
Think about it this way. Your conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, can only process about 40 to 50 bits of information per second. It is slow and methodical.
Okay, 50 bits.
Your subconscious brain is processing roughly 11 million bits of information per second.
Wait, 11 million.
11 million. It notes micro-expressions on people's faces, subtle shifts in vocal tone, minute environmental details, spatial relationships, and it compares that massive data set instantly against the entire historical database of every experience you've ever had.
So it's like a supercomputer running a background check on the present moment in a millisecond without your conscious mind even realizing the program is running.
Yes, and when that background check finds a pattern in the present that previously led to a dangerous or negative outcome in the past, it doesn't have time to write you a conscious memo.
So what does it do?
It sends a physical electrical sensation directly to your body. That gut feeling is anatomically literal.
Right.
The brain communicates with the enteric nervous system, a massive web of neurons in your gastrointestinal tract, via the vagus nerve.
So it literally signals the stomach.
Yes. That vagal signal causes a physical flutter, a drop, or a sense of unease in your stomach. That is true intuition. It is purely data-driven, it is emotionally neutral, and it usually presents as a calm, clear physical knowing, or a quiet sense that something doesn't fit.
So how does that differ from the anxiety that stops us from taking good risks?
Anxiety is a fear-based projection generated by an overactive amygdala. It is loud, it is chaotic, and it is usually accompanied by sympathetic nervous system activation, a racing heart, shallow breathing, a tight chest. Anxiety focuses on catastrophizing an imagined future, spinning out what-if scenarios.
Okay.
Intuition is a quiet recognition of a present pattern.
So intuition is calm, this data doesn't match, while anxiety is a screaming, what if everything falls apart?
That is the exact physiological difference. And learning to tune the noise out to hear that data-driven vagal signal is a massive component of operating at peak function.
That makes so much sense.
This ties directly into another concept Dr. Swart heavily unpacks, which is visualization. Again, this is a term often relegated to the realm of vision boards and wishful thinking, but the hard neuroscience behind it is incredibly robust.
Right, because earlier we talked about the reticular activating system, the biological bouncer at the club of your consciousness.
Yes, the RAS. When you actively visualize a goal, you are not engaging in magic. Neurologically, the brain has a very hard time distinguishing between a vividly imagined event and a real physical event.
So it thinks it's happening.
Pretty much. When you close your eyes and vividly imagine the sensory experience, the emotions, and the exact physical steps of achieving a goal, you are actively firing the motor cortex and the neural pathways associated with that action, even though your muscles aren't actually moving.
Wow.
More importantly, you are forcefully programming the RAS. You are telling the bouncer, this specific visual and emotional outcome is incredibly important to my biological survival and success.
So then, as I go through my physical day, my reprogrammed RAS starts letting in the resources, the overheard conversations, the obscure opportunities that align with that visualization, things I would have completely ignored or been blind to yesterday.
Precisely. You aren't manifesting a new reality out of the ether. You are physically altering your biological perception filter to aggressively capitalize on the reality and opportunities that already exist around you.
That is so empowering.
It is. But, and this is a massive critical caveat in the clinical data, achieving this level of peak function, accessing deep intuition, and programming the RAS requires a stable biological baseline.
Which most of us don't have.
Right. And Dr. Swart specifically addresses the elephant in the room regarding our collective societal baseline, the catastrophic impact of the pandemic on mental health and neurobiology.
Yeah, because the pandemic didn't just disrupt our travel schedules, it fundamentally shattered our neurological baselines. We were exposed to a chronic, unpredictable, invisible, lethal threat for years.
Well,
And we were socially isolated, which, as we established earlier with the social brain, registers biologically not just as lonely, but as a severe threat to our physical survival.
exactly. The pandemic induced a state of mass, prolonged biological trauma. It kept our collective nervous systems locked in a sympathetic fight-or-flight state for an unnatural duration, creating a massive allostatic load.
What is allostatic load?
Allostatic load is the cumulative wear and tear on biological systems from chronic stress. When you are locked in survival mode, your brain physically restricts blood flow and access to the higher-order functions in the prefrontal cortex.
So it shuts down the good stuff.
It shuts down creativity, long-term planning, deep empathy, and certainly peak intuition. Your brain concludes that you don't need to visualize a 5-year goal when you might not survive the week. You are just treading water, trying not to drown in cortisol.
So how do we reset that shattered baseline? Because Dr. Swart emphasizes two specific interventions that seem almost too simple, but she frames them as biologically vital antidotes: nature and finding your purpose.
They sound like pleasant weekend hobbies, I know, but the neuroscience reveals them as critical biological anchors. Let's look at the mechanics of nature first.
Okay.
The human brain evolved entirely outdoors over millions of years. It is calibrated to the sensory inputs of the natural world. When you immerse yourself in nature, a practice the Japanese clinically study as forest bathing or shinrin-yoku, you are exposing your sensory system to highly specific data.
Like what kind of data?
You see the fractal patterns of tree branches and leaves, which the visual cortex processes with zero strain. You hear the specific, non-threatening acoustic frequencies of birdsong or moving water.
So it's soothing.
But it's more than soothing. Most importantly, you inhale chemical compounds emitted by trees called phytoncides. These specific environmental inputs trigger an immediate massive downregulation of the sympathetic nervous system. They force the activation of the parasympathetic rest and digest system.
Wow, just from breathing near trees.
Yes. Clinical studies show that time in the woods lowers heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and significantly drops circulating cortisol levels. Nature sends an immediate, hardwired biological signal of absolute safety to the most ancient parts of your brainstem.
It is quite literally plugging the biological machine back into its original evolutionary charging station to clear the errors.
That's a great way to put it.
And what about purpose? Because finding your purpose sounds like a philosophical luxury for people who have already figured everything else out.
It is marketed as a luxury, but neuroscience reveals it as a fundamental biological necessity for resilience. Having a clear, articulated purpose, a why, that extends beyond mere daily survival and paying bills, engages the brain's reward networks, specifically the mesolimbic dopamine system, in a profound and sustained way.
Yeah.
It provides a forward-looking neurological trajectory. When the brain has a deeply held purpose, it alters how it perceives the environment. It frames obstacles, failures, and daily stressors not as existential fatal threats that require a panic response, but as manageable challenges to be overcome on the path to that larger purpose.
So it changes the meaning of the stress.
It changes the meaning, which physically alters the neurochemical cocktail your body releases under pressure. Instead of just flooding your system with toxic levels of cortisol, a brain anchored in purpose releases a balanced ratio of cortisol and DHEA.
What's DHEA?
DHEA is a neurosteroid that physically buffers the toxic effects of cortisol and actually promotes neural growth and resilience in the face of stress. Without a clearly defined purpose, the brain is adrift. It reacts to every single wave, every email, every inconvenience as a potential disaster. Purpose acts as the neurological rudder, stabilizing the entire system.
Man, this has been an absolutely immense journey to try and synthesize all of this for you listening. Your brain is not just a computer sealed in a bone box. It is a deeply interconnected, highly malleable, physically dynamic system that is in a constant, relentless chemical conversation with your physical body and your external environment.
Exactly. We started by looking at how stress isn't just an abstract feeling in your head. It physically leaks through your skin via apocrine glands, chemically alerts and infects the nervous systems of those around you.
And even instructs your biology to hoard dangerous visceral fat, a process aggressively compounded by environmental endocrine disruptors like the BPA on store receipts.
But we also learned the precise mechanics of how to defend the fortress by prioritizing deep, slow-wave sleep, giving the lymphatic system the specific omega-3s and polyphenols. It needs to wash away the toxic amyloid plaques.
And getting outside to let UVB rays synthesize the master neurohormone of vitamin D, we can actively, physically fend off cognitive decline.
And perhaps most importantly, we explored the biological mechanics of hope through neuroplasticity and epigenetics. You are not stuck. You're not permanently bound by the traumas of your past or the deep neurological canyons of your current habits.
Your brain can literally dismantle and rewrite its own physical structure.
Yes. And paired with the breathtaking research showing cellular age reversal in just 8 weeks by scrubbing the epigenetic sheet music, we know the biological machine is incredibly forgiving and aggressively responsive to new, positive inputs.
We've seen how the very words you speak out loud physically program your biological filter, how your relationship patterns are guided by the myelinated pathways of your childhood, and how tapping into the subconscious supercomputer of your vagal intuition and motor cortex visualization can unlock your absolute peak potential.
Provided you downregulate the trauma of the modern world by anchoring yourself in the fractal patterns of nature and the biological rudder of a driving purpose.
Right.
The overarching, undeniable takeaway from all of this clinical data is agency. The tools to optimize your physical and mental reality are not external products you need to buy. They are literal mechanisms built into your evolutionary biology. You simply have to consciously choose to engage them.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. We started this deep dive by discussing how stress is a physical contagion, how it literally leaks through our sweat, chemically infecting the people around us with fear, spiking their cortisol and altering their biology.
Yeah.
But if neuroplasticity is real, if our epigenome can be scrubbed clean, and if our words and our purpose can profoundly reshape the physical structure of our own brains, could resilience, profound peace, and deep joy be just as biologically contagious? Are you capable of leaking positive, stabilizing neurological states into the environment? And what would happen to the people you love if you started trying today? You know, we tend to think of the human brain as this isolated supercomputer, just sitting there, locked away in its dark, quiet, bony vault.
Right, completely separated from the messy physical reality of the body.
Exactly. We treat it like a passenger, watching the world go by through the windshield of our eyes. You feed it some coffee, maybe give it a crossword puzzle, and expect it to just keep quietly running its calculations.
So that's the standard view.
But the more you actually look at the science, the more you realize that windshield isn't a window at all. It's a projector. Your brain is actively shaping your physical reality, your waistline, and your
He
relationships.
is deeply, fundamentally connected to everything.
So today we're diving into a massive stack of research centering on the groundbreaking work of neuroscientist Dr. Tar Swart, alongside some really recent findings from experts in aging, memory, and trauma. Okay, let's unpack this, because what we're looking at is a total paradigm shift in how we understand our own physical biology.
It really is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I mean, we are synthesizing information across disciplines today that usually never talk to each other.
Like dermatology and deep neuroscience.
Exactly. Dermatology, anti-aging research, neuroscience. The goal here is to give you, the listener, a comprehensive understanding of how to hack your mind for total resilience. Because that artificial wall we've built between mental health and physical health,
Yeah.
it simply does not exist.
And nowhere is the destruction of that wall more bizarre than when we look at how stress physically manifests. Let's start with the skin.
Aye.
I was going through Dr. Swart's findings, and she talks about how stress literally leaks through the skin
Yes.
and that it becomes contagious to the people around you, which is just wild to me.
The mechanism behind this is phenomenal. So when you are under chronic stress, your HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, is pumping out cortisol.
Right, the stress hormone.
Right. But that cortisol doesn't just float around aimlessly inside you. It actively alters the physiological properties of your sweat.
Wait, so it's not just regular sweat from being hot?
No, not at all. You begin emitting a completely different chemical signature, specifically something called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
It's like a specific chemical cocktail.
Exactly. And human olfactory systems are evolutionarily wired to detect these specific VOCs. So when you walk into a room stressed, the people around you inhale those compounds,
Even if they don't consciously smell anything.
even if they don't realize it. Their olfactory receptors send a signal straight to their amygdala, the brain's threat center. And largely subconsciously, it triggers a spike in their own cortisol.
Oh, wow.
Your stress literally becomes their biological stress.
That is mind-blowing. So we're basically walking biohazards when we're anxious. I mean, if my stress is leaking out of me like bad perfume and making the people around me stressed, how do we even begin to plug these leaks without locking ourselves in a bubble?
Well, realizing it's happening is the first step.
But wait, I have to bring up this other detail from our sources because it's even crazier. We had an anti-aging expert noting an insane physical trigger for visceral fat, and it's touching store receipts.
Yes, thermal paper.
Wait, you're telling me my store receipt is making me fat? Come on. How does touching a piece of paper override my metabolism?
What's fascinating here is the specific endocrine disruption taking place. So the thermal paper used for receipts is coated in BPA or BPS.
Which are plastics, right?
Yes, and they are highly lipophilic chemicals,
Mhm.
meaning they love fat and they absorb rapidly through the dermal layers of your fingers directly into your bloodstream,
Just from touching it for a few seconds.
just from handling it, yeah. And once in the blood, they act as endocrine disruptors. They mimic estrogen, but more insidiously, they trigger glucocorticoid receptors. Your body interprets this chemical signal as a profound systemic stressor. Essentially, it thinks it's a famine warning.
So it bypasses the brain entirely and just tells the cells they are in danger.
Precisely. And in response to that specific chemical stress, your body shunts any available energy directly to visceral fat depots, that deep belly fat.
Because that's the emergency reserve.
Right. Visceral fat is highly reactive to cortisol and serves as the body's primary emergency energy backup. So to answer your question about how we fix this, the conventional approach is just completely backward.
How so?
Well, look at our dermatology sources. They focus relentlessly on complex topical skincare routines. But if the root cause of your skin barrier breaking down is cortisol leaking from a neurologically stressed baseline, no moisturizer on earth will fix it.
Because the leak is coming from the inside.
Exactly. And Swart emphasizes this stress loop uniquely affects women due to complex hormone cascades. It can even alter the developing nervous system of a child during pregnancy.
Oh, wow. So the skin issues, the stubborn stomach fat, the stressed out spouse, it's not always a diet or hygiene problem. It's a brain problem projecting outward.
That's the paradigm shift right there.
Yeah. Which leads me to the obvious question. If our brains are physically altering our bodies for the worse, can we physically alter our brains to fight back?
Absolutely. And this is where we dive into the most hopeful concept in modern science, neuroplasticity.
Right. The brain's ability to change.
Yeah.
Wow.
For a long time, the medical consensus was that your brain was like concrete, poured in childhood, set by your 20s, and then it just slowly degraded over time.
Which is pretty depressing.
Very. But Dr. Swartz's work thoroughly dismantles that. Your brain is highly malleable. It's constantly reorganizing itself and forming new neural connections throughout your entire life.
Okay, but if neuroplasticity means our brains are basically moldable clay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
We see in our sources from Dr. Gabor Mate that trauma is often the root cause of feeling entirely lost in life, trapping us in terrible patterns.
Yes, trauma leaves a deep mark.
And then we have this staggering finding from David Sinclair that biological aging can be reversed. He ran an 8-week protocol where cells appeared 75% younger.
It's an incredible study, yes.
So if our biology is that responsive, why on earth do we default to the same bad habits? Is this a hardware problem, like a broken engine, or a software problem?
It is entirely both. Let's look at the hardware first. Think of a trauma response or a bad habit as a deep-rutted groove in a dirt road.
Okay.
Every time a stressor occurs, your thoughts naturally flow into that deep groove because it's the path of least resistance. That's your hardware dictating your reaction. Mate points out that trauma leaves us feeling lost because we are reacting on autopilot to past injuries.
Right. But driving a mental car out of a deep rut isn't just a matter of deciding to do it. I mean, it feels physically impossible sometimes.
Because it is physically demanding. When you choose a new reaction, you are forcing an electrical signal over raw, unpaved brain tissue.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But here is the mechanism of neuroplasticity. As you force that new thought pattern repeatedly, the brain responds to the electrical demand by coating that new neural pathway in a fatty substance called myelin.
Like insulating a wire.
Better than that, it's like paving that dirt road with smooth asphalt. An unmyelinated signal travels at maybe 2 miles per hour. A heavily myelinated signal travels at 200 miles per hour.
Oh, wow. That's a massive difference.
Huge. Over time, that new, healthy pathway becomes the biological path of least resistance, and the old trauma rut physically degrades in a process called synaptic pruning.
So you literally lose the old habit physically.
Yes, and this directly ties into David Sinclair's findings. His 8-week protocol didn't just use vague positive thinking. It used targeted diet, specifically methylation adaptogens, strict sleep hygiene, and exercise to alter DNA methylation.
He reversed the epigenetic clock.
Exactly. We are talking about changing the actual physical expression of your genes and your neural wiring.
Okay, so if neuroplasticity and myelination are the hardware capabilities, the ability to lay down new asphalt, how do we actually program where the roads go?
Right, the software side.
Yeah. According to Dr. Swart, we program it through our software, specifically the words we speak and the internal signals, like intuition, that we follow.
We severely underestimate the biological power of language. Dr. Swartz's findings show that the exact words you say aloud don't just reflect your state of mind. They dictate your nervous system.
How exactly? Because saying I'm stressed feels like an observation, not a command.
Well, it's a command loop. When you speak, Broca's area in your brain forms the words, but your auditory cortex hears your own voice.
Oh, so you're listening to yourself.
Exactly. It feeds that auditory data into Wernicke's area for processing, which then signals the amygdala. So when your brain hears you say, I am stressed, it interprets that as a factual report of your environment.
And it reacts to it.
Right. It responds by triggering the HPA axis to release more cortisol to deal with the threat you just verbally confirmed.
So our spoken words are literally the code we're typing into our own neurocomputer. If I use negative self-talk, I'm intentionally writing a bug into my own behavioral software.
That is exactly what you are doing. And this is why Dr. Swart is a fierce advocate for visualization.
Visualizing success, that kind of thing.
Yes. When you vividly visualize an outcome, functional MRI scans show that your brain activates the exact same motor and sensory cortices as it would if you were actually performing the physical action.
Wait, really? The exact same areas?
The exact same areas. You are literally laying down myelin, paving the road before you even take a physical step.
That is incredible. It's like running a simulation that physically upgrades the processor running it.
It's a great analogy.
And she pairs this with something that sounds almost mystical: intuition. She has an absolute rule that you should always follow your intuition. But why is a hard data neuroscientist telling us to go with a gut feeling?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, intuition isn't magic. It is simply the brain's rapid pattern recognition software operating below conscious awareness.
Taking in the surroundings.
Right. Your brain takes in millions of pieces of sensory data every second. Microexpressions, subtle shifts in tone, environmental cues. Your conscious mind cannot process that volume. It would crash.
So what happens to all that data?
Your subconscious crunches it in the background. But because it bypasses the language centers of the brain, it can't hand you a written report.
So it gives you a feeling instead.
Yes, through the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve connects the brain directly to the millions of neurons in your gastrointestinal tract. It delivers the conclusion as a physical sensation,
Like a tightness in your chest.
or a sudden sense of dread,
Hmm.
or a feeling of lightness that is highly advanced neurocomputation presenting itself as a literal gut feeling.
Wow.
Ignoring it is like putting tape over your car's check engine light just because you can't personally see the feeling transmission.
That reframes intuition completely for me. It's not a guess, it's the ultimate data summary.
Exactly.
But let's look at the long-term trajectory here. We've talked about words and intuition guiding our daily actions, but we also have to protect the structural integrity of the brain as we age. I was looking at Dr. Swartz's protocols for preventing degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Crucial stuff.
And when we cross-reference that with the other experts in our source stack, the interventions are deeply biological.
Yes, because they all point to a unified truth about the brain's physical ecosystem. We treat cognitive decline as a brain disease, but it's really a systemic failure.
Exactly. Let's look at Dr. William Lai's research. He talks about needing to eat 5 specific foods to physically boost memory repair overnight: walnuts, dark chocolate, kiwi, tart cherry, and chamomile.
Very specific protocol.
Right. And then we have this vitamin D expert warning about the big lie regarding sunlight, and an exercise neuroscientist proving that physical movement prevents dementia.
They're all connected to that same systemic ecosystem.
But wait, I have to push back here. It's wild that preventing Alzheimer's isn't just doing crossword puzzles. You're telling me that playing Sudoku or chess for 2 hours is practically useless if I'm eating junk food before bed? Are we focusing too much on brain games and ignoring the biology?
We absolutely are, because you cannot outpuzzle biological decay. The brain relies on a massive vascular network to deliver oxygen and to clear out metabolic waste.
Like a trash collection system.
Yes, it's called the glymphatic system,
Yeah.
and it operates almost entirely while you are in deep sleep.
And the foods dictate the sleep.
Precisely. Walnuts provide ALA omega-3s for neuronal repair. Tart cherry gives a massive natural melatonin boost. And chamomile provides apigenin, which physically binds to GABA receptors to sedate the nervous system.
So what happens if you just eat a bunch of sugar instead?
If you eat inflammatory junk food instead, your body spikes insulin and cortisol, pulling you out of deep sleep. The glymphatic system never turns on.
So the trash just sits there.
The metabolic trash literally builds up into amyloid plaques, which is the hallmark of Alzheimer's.
Okay, so where does the sun and exercise come in?
This touches on what that expert called the big lie regarding vitamin D. The idea that popping a supplement is exactly the same as getting sunlight. It isn't.
Why not?
When unfiltered sunlight hits your retina in the morning, it triggers the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in your brain. This sets the timer for that glymphatic trash collection later that night.
Oh, so a pill can't do that.
Exactly. A pill cannot set your circadian rhythm. Furthermore, exercise induces the release of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
What's that?
It's literally miracle grow for your neurons. So yes, crossword puzzles are great for synaptic activity, but if the underlying hardware is drowning in toxic waste, lacks basic fuel, and isn't getting bathed in BDNF, the puzzle won't save it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. We spend all this time trying to biohack our way to health, tracking our sleep, eating the exact right amount of walnuts, dodging thermal receipts at the grocery store.
It can be exhausting.
Right. But human brains do not exist in isolation. Dr. Swartz's work dives deep into how the brain influences our relationships and how exposing yourself to nature and finding your purpose are vital for mental resilience. Are we overcomplicating wellness by focusing purely on the molecules and ignoring our environment?
We often seek complex chemical solutions because we feel our problems are complex. But this raises an important question for you, the listener. What is your brain optimizing for? Why should it bother rewiring itself, laying down new myelin, and fighting off cognitive decline?
It needs a structural anchor, I guess. A reason to expend that energy.
Exactly. Purpose and connection are the biological anchors for neuroplasticity. We mentioned co-regulation earlier with the stress sweat, right?
Yeah, making others stressed.
Well, the inverse is also true. A healthy, secure relationship regulates your nervous system. It physically lowers your cortisol, preventing the stress leakage and visceral fat storage.
And nature does this too.
Yes, through visual processing. Natural environments are full of repeating mathematical patterns called fractals. Think of the branches of a tree or the edges of a cloud.
Okay, I can picture that.
Human visual cortices evolved to process fractals with zero metabolic effort. When you look at nature, your brain stops straining to process harsh, unnatural geometric environments like cities or screens.
It's a break for the brain.
A literal break. This effortless processing forces the brain into an alpha wave state, instantly deactivating the amygdala's fight-or-flight response.
So a walk in the woods isn't just a poetic escape. It is a literal neurological imperative to cool down your hardware.
Precisely. And having a sense of purpose provides the neurochemical drive, the sustained dopamine and serotonin that fuels the immense effort required to build those new myelinated pathways.
The asphalt we talked about.
Exactly. Without connection and purpose, the brain lacks the fundamental signal that it needs to survive. You can take all the supplements in the world, but if your nervous system feels chronically isolated and aimless, it initiates a cascade of protective, stress-based responses that will systematically degrade your health.
It all comes back to the realization that your mind is deeply, intricately connected to every cell in your body and every person in your environment. It is a dynamic, moldable machine.
It really is.
By monitoring your spoken words, remembering they are the literal code, writing your behavioral software, feeding your brain the right foods to activate lymphatic clearance, avoiding hidden endocrine disruptors, and anchoring your biology with purpose and connection, you aren't just feeling better, you are physically reshaping your reality. You are laying down new asphalt.
But as we wrap up this analysis, there's one final haunting thread we pulled from Dr. Swartz's work that we have to mention.
Oh, right. This part was wild.
Everything we've discussed today is rooted in the observable physical brain shaping our reality. But Dr. Swartz's research doesn't stop at the edges of an fMRI scan.
No, it goes quite a bit further.
She has ventured into the very edge of the unknown, exploring the idea that your brain might actually be hiding messages from your soul. She has even pointed to strange, emerging neuroscientific anomalies, suggesting the possibility of communication after death.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. But if our thoughts can literally change our physical cells, leak through our skin as chemical signals, and rewrite our genetic expression, well, what else is your brain capable of doing right now that you simply lack the instruments to see?
Something to think about the next time you assume your thoughts are entirely your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go for a walk in the woods, listen to your intuition, watch what you say about yourself today, and we'll see you next time.